Nowadays, an M rating can be a bit of a detriment to your sales due to how much of a market there is for younger gamers, but this can often lead to publishers pulling all the reins on developers or the developers just cutting stuff out of their own game in order to get that lower rating and better sales. Kicking off our list today of 10 games that should have probably been rated M is Batman Arkham Asylum. Now, this was one of the first actually good Batman games, and to this day, many people consider it to be one of the best superhero games ever made. You guys let me know if you agree with that. But one thing that Arkham Asylum was missing was a little more mature material. Now, Batman is an extremely dark superhero, and his stories often cover really mature subject matter, and that's part of why people love this universe so much. Plus, Arkham Knight went for the M rating and was able to show just how awesome the previous games could have been if they hadn't held back. The developers of Arkham Asylum even stated at one point during the development cycle there was a lot more blood and gore and mature imagery in the game, but it was either all toned down or deleted completely in order to get that T rating. This month's giveaway is for a brand new PlayStation 4 console. All you have to do to enter is like the video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, turn on those notifications, and tweet me why you want to win it with your Twitter handle included. Naughty Bear. Now, do you remember Naughty Bear? It was a 2010 action dark comedy game where you played as a murderous teddy bear going around Perfection Island and brutally murdering the other teddy bears. You could use real weapons or you could use improvised ones like baseball bats. You could torture your enemies. You could provoke them into killing themselves. You could do all kinds of stuff. Naughty Bear is a pretty dark game for sure, but you can really tell that the developers were really walking this fine line between a rating of T and a rating of M. Now, personally, I think they should have just gone all in and basically made this thing Ted the video game. Maybe if they did, people would remember it a little more fondly. Battlefield Bad Company. Now, Battlefield is a series where people don't really care about the campaigns very much anymore, but that didn't used to be the case. In fact, the first Bad Company was all about the campaign, and it had some of the best writing, and it made it a borderline comedy game. Bad Company launched in June of 2008 with a T rating for strong language and violence, and it was a great game, but looking back, it probably would have been even better if DICE hadn't been forced to go for that T rating. This would have allowed them to have a lot more freedom with the writing for the campaign and also get a bit more creative and immersive with the blood during combat, because there really isn't actually any blood in the first Bad Company, which always kind of took you out of the experience when you're shooting someone, and there's not really any visual feedback like we're used to in other games. It was a great game. I think it could have been better if they would have not worried about the rating. TimeSplitters 2. Does anybody remember TimeSplitters? This was a sci-fi shooter series that kicked off back in the year 2000. It had 3 entries before being forgotten due to poor sales. However, it did become a cult classic over the years, with the third game being considered arguably the best of them all. But interestingly enough, the third game is also the only one with an M rating. Is that a coincidence? TimeSplitters 2 and 3 were definitely the best in the series, but looking back on it, TimeSplitters 2 was very obviously held back by the desire for that T rating, because when the series crossed over into M, those elements got a lot better, like the visual style and the more mature writing. Now, could you guys imagine how amazing TimeSplitters 2 would have been if they would have approached it the same way that they approached the third game and they weren't so concerned about the sales and the rating? Fatal Frame. Now, this isn't a game where I think they should have gone further. In fact, it's totally the opposite. For those that didn't know, the original Fatal Frame for the PS2 actually got a T rating from the ESRB, and I have no idea. Somebody must have been paid off. For those that don't know, Fatal Frame is a survival horror game released for the PS2 in late 2001, where it had you venture around a haunted mansion while fighting off ghosts with a magic camera. It is full of blood, disturbing images, and terrifying atmosphere, but somehow it got away with the T rating, and I don't know how they pulled it off. If you look at the gameplay of it today, it should be a no-brainer that this is an M-rated game, but I guess the ESRB thought otherwise at the time. Maybe they were a fan, I don't know. All that being said, Fatal Frame games are really good if you're looking for a horror game with great atmosphere. Check them out if you never have. Cracking into the top 5 today, Dark Souls 2. This is often looked at as the lowest point in the series, which is impressive because this is still a really good game. So that says a lot about the series as a whole. But a lot of people forget that Dark Souls 2 was actually rated T instead of M. That's right, there's a Dark Souls game that was rated T, okay? All the others are rated M. Dark Souls 1 and 3, as well as Demon's Souls and Bloodborne, were all rated M. But somehow, Dark Souls 2 squeaked by and got a T rating, likely due to how much the monster design was toned down from the horrific mutated creatures to just kind of dudes in armor. I mean, I guess. As Zero Punctuation said in their review, a lot of people criticize Dark Souls 2 for its lack of creativity compared to the other games in the series, but if you ask me, that's probably why the game, that's what happened. They were going for a T rating, so they had to tone down the monster design to something a little less grotesque, and thankfully, the series got back on track quickly. With Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, you got all that grotesque blood, everything back to a mature rating. This franchise needs to live in the mature rating zone. Uncharted 4. This is another one of those games where I honestly don't know how it got away with a T rating. Sony must have been working some magic behind the scenes because the Uncharted series has always been kind of riding that fine line between T and M. But honestly, I think Uncharted 4 would have been better off just embracing it and going for the M. It was the last game in the main series, and it was definitely the most intense of all of them. Aside from the violence, which was already questionably T-rated, the story content got a lot more mature as the series went on, and I think it would have served the writers better if the restrictions were taken off of them and they were allowed to not care about the rating. Just let the writers write. Let the developers develop. Let it all come together, right? I can't imagine Sony would have lost many sales from an M-rated Uncharted game, especially when it was advertised as being the last one in the main series. Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, one of the most infamously T-rated games in history. Nothing with Mortal Kombat should have a T rating on it, okay? It had the perfect opportunity to make an amazing fighting game, but due to DC wanting the game to be playable by anyone, they not only had to tone down the violence to get that T rating, but they also had to greatly tone down the fighting mechanics to make them easier. Released in 2008 as a crossover between DC and Mortal Kombat, while hype was high, it was quickly squandered when fans heard of all the changes being made to the MK formula in order to fit the mold of a T game. Mortal Kombat doesn't belong as a T game, people. Fatalities were heavily censored, and there was no gore to speak of. No gore in a Mortal Kombat game. I can't even believe I'm saying that. There was hardly any blood at all. The game itself just wasn't very good on its own, and the underwhelming reception of Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe led to Midway leaving the Mortal Kombat license and NetherRealms taking over development for the future, which, honestly, looking back now, that was probably the best decision in the long run. Injustice 2. Speaking of NetherRealms, Injustice 2 was their second standalone DC fighting game, and I think a lot of people agree that it could have been better if it wasn't being limited to that T rating. DC games have always been pretty dark, and Injustice 2 carried that tradition on, but there was a lot of kind of weird elements of the game that were obviously there for the sake of the rating, like when you perform this huge, devastating super move on enemies, and they don't bleed at all, and they barely react to what happened. The lack of restriction on the writing team also could have made the campaign a little more interesting for the same reasons that I mentioned in the Batman Arkham entry early in the video. DC Comics are pretty dark by nature. When you make a video game that's supposed to capture that darkness, but then you also restrict it to a T rating, you're going to lose a little bit of that possible impact that it could have had on the gamer. However, I know that if Injustice 2 had been rated M, it would have lost some sales. It likely wouldn't have been as popular in esports. So I guess sometimes the T rating is for the better. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to drop a like on the video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel with post notifications on so you always get alerted when a new video goes up and you can get that elusive first comment. And at number 1, Shadow the Hedgehog. Now, I know this never would happen, but could you imagine how great it would have been? Shadow the Hedgehog is one of the most infamously edgy games in gaming history, and it's kind of become a meme in the gaming world since its release due to how hard it was trying to be dark and serious when the visuals totally clashed with that because, well, I mean, it's a Sonic game. But what if Sega had gone all out and let the game go for an M rating? What if they cranked up the blood and gore and cursing and essentially made it Doom, but with a hedgehog as the main character? It never would have, it wouldn't have happened, but the memes that would have came from that game would have been glorious. And there you have it, my friends. Those are 10 games that I think could have been so much better if the developers just went all in with the M rating. I'm not saying any of these games are bad because most of them were good in their own right, but there was definitely some lost potential when the decision was made to go for the T rating for the sake of higher sales and a wider target audience. What do you guys think? Do you think these games could have been improved with some more mature elements, or do you think they were just fine the way they were? You guys let me know in the comments, and I'll see you soon.